we have decided to inflict her with only one sentence, that is sentence of death.
India will find some way to not send her back.
Has India lost Bangladesh for good?
Welcome to Global Eyes. I am Shani Rosanes.
And I'm Waslat Hasrat Nazimi. And this week, Bangladesh opened a new chapter. A domestic war crimes tribunal sentenced former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to death in absentia for her role in the deadly crackdown on last year's student-led uprising. A leader who ruled for 15 years, now condemned for crimes against humanity.
And this verdict doesn't just close an era, it ruptures Bangladesh's political order and reshapes the balance of power in South Asia, especially for India, which had relied on Hasina more than any other partner. Her conviction signals the collapse of that alliance.
To understand this moment, I spoke with Dr. Mubashar Hassan, an academic, activist, and survivor of enforced disappearance under Hasina's government. His insights explain the emotional power of this verdict and what it means for Bangladeshis today.
And I spoke with Sabir Bhowmik. Bhowmik is a veteran journalist, a former BBC bureau chief, and one of the most experienced analysts on India-Bangladesh relations. We discussed why this verdict puts Delhi in an impossible position, what are the chances of extradition, and you might be surprised, there's also one thing both our guests agreed on.
In this episode, we want to know what Bangladesh's future might look like now and what this means for India.
Global Eyes.
Well, Waslat, let's start with the basics, because Hasina ruled Bangladesh for 15 years. This moment that we've experienced this week, it's enormous, the magnitude and what it means for Bangladesh itself and its political makeshift, but also for India and the relations, of the balance of power in the region and in South Asia.
Yeah, I mean, she was India's closest ally or one of the closest allies, but this came at a human cost. So there were crackdowns on dissent, forced disappearances, extrajudicial killings. Dr. Hassan, who I spoke to, he himself was abducted and he was held captive for 44 days. So I was really interested to know what his reaction was, and his reaction was quite emotional.
It became a story of oppressors, an oppressor being overthrown by the oppressed. And so that sense of jubilation was there. And I was in Bangladesh after 7 years of exile, living away in last year, in 2024. And I've seen people suffering. I've met parents whose young kids were shot dead by the police and they couldn't take the dead body because that dead body would add up to the official figure of death that is caused by Sheikh Hasina's government.
It's interesting to see a person like him who's so personally affected by that still managed to be very calm and very analytic in how he treats this, despite the fact this is very much emotional. This is the lives and suffering of so many people. I mean, not just during the uprising, the monsoon uprising, but rather all these years, under Hasina rule. So what is your impression of the impact this had on Bangladeshis?
It was interesting to hear his view. And yes, he was very emotional and yet still very much analytical at the same time, which was amazing for me. One thing that that really stood out to me was that he said people before, during and under Sheikh Hasina's rule, people were just scared and there was this fear that many people had. But then when he went back, after so many years, he saw a graffiti where it said, death to the intelligence agency. And he said before it was unimaginable that something like this could even happen.
It may sound a bit silly, but in previous 15 years, Bangladeshis were afraid to name the military intelligence DGFI. They're just afraid. And now there is open discussion about the role of DGFI, about whether they should be abolished or not.
That's also what's really important is how people now actually feel. And a lot of those families who were affected finally feel seen.
And I think they also feel vindicated because it's a very rare moment of what seems like an accountability, because we live in a world where it feels like the higher you go up the ladder, the more responsibility you have, the less accountability we see. And I think this is a very rare moment. Of course, for Hasina herself and her closest circle, they claim this was a political rigged, kind of sentences.
And I saw those images, and I'm sure you saw them too, where people were clapping in the courtroom, and then outside, people on the streets were celebrating. I mean, we here in the Western world, we would not celebrate this, and we are against the death sentence. And this is also what Mubashar said. He said, I am against the death sentence, but at the same time, it's the highest possible judgment that could happen.
Looking at her and her legacy, I think we often try to talk about women and women in leadership and defense and strategy and what that means. And again, it's another case where you got to look beyond identity politics, because Hasina is another example of one of these leaders that the West loves loving. Even though it's a very complex, kind of legacy and needs, actually, that she was in charge of, her government was in charge of for so many years. And you always think, well, many men do that as well and get away with that. But when a woman does it, I think there's, at least for me personally, also another extra layer of disappointment.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you would also have, I wonder if she would have been the leader of this country if her father had not been basically the national father of Bangladesh, and she tried to continue his legacy. But when I spoke to Mubashar Hassan, he said she failed.
Because Sheikh Hasina built a total authoritarian edifice around that legacy of her father, people were angry against her father's legacy too, because he became a symbol of oppression because of the oppression Sheikh Hasina unleashed against her own citizens.
Yeah, this really made me think how we talk about women in politics, women in security, and it's such a complex issue.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the reasons that she stayed for so long is she got a lot of support from India. India saw Hasina as a very important ally. Their partnership was very tight and very strong. And this is something I discussed with the second guest we have on our show today, with Subir Bhowmik. He's a veteran journalist, and he had a lot to say about that.
She did practically whatever India wanted. She addressed India's security concerns.
But mostly he was first talking about how India found itself in quite a complicated situation after this verdict.
I'm fairly sure that India will find some way to not send her back, because she has been a trusted ally. You see, India is caught between the rock and the hard place, to sum it up. If it sends Hasina back, then its future diplomacy in the region, its future effort to create friends in the region will suffer a severe blow. Nobody in these smaller countries around India, who India would try to befriend, would take India seriously, because I don't know how it happens in the rest of the world, but in South Asia, definitely loyalty is very important.
And I think that is the core of this crisis with India, because if India does send her back, it will send an important message to countries in the region who then maybe think, okay, you cannot really trust India, because if it comes down to a situation like this, they will hand you over. But also, if they keep her, then this will definitely damage the relationship with Bangladesh for many, many years to come.
Yeah, and I think India said they will do whatever is for the benefit of the Bangladeshi people, the nation, and they're also in the.
It was a very neutral comment.
And in the
statement.
extradition law, there is a possibility for them to avoid extradition if they feel the trial was politically motivated, as they say now, and of course Hasina herself says that. So I think there is a technical way getting out of it, but I think it doesn't change the fact that India here in this matter of choosing between Bangladesh and the bigger interest of India and Bangladesh as these two nations versus choosing Hasina as the leader of Bangladesh that was there for many years but is no longer there. I think we've been seeing that in the last year and a half since the toppling of Hasina's government, they've been very hesitant or not too effective in trying to come up with a new strategy and how to deal with a new situation, sort of like still lamenting the fact that the situation has changed.
Yeah, that's what I noticed as well. I think what lies beneath this whole situation is also obviously the relationship with Pakistan. And I think they're scared of Bangladesh having a much better relationship with Pakistan.
He's getting much closer to Pakistan, especially military to military relation. Some of the very close aides of a terror mastermind, Hafiz Saeed, who heads the Lashkar-e-Taiba in Pakistan and is responsible for many terror attacks in India. His very close friend was in Bangladesh recently in some of the border districts, and Indian intelligence was very actively monitoring him.
Bangladesh is also using Pakistan and China as to strengthen its strategic friendship, which would eventually kind of irritate India. But as long as Bangladesh doesn't hamper India's security, which is always India's concern, um, I think it would be a kind of bargaining situation.
Maybe we can also look at how the situation is now. So how is the situation since Hasina fell? And when I spoke to Mubashar Hassan about it, he was quite cautious because you hear about when you listen to the report, when you look at the reports by human rights groups, and if you look at the accounts of many people who live in Bangladesh, it seems like many people are quite disappointed. I think they expected more of the interim government, which is headed by Muhammad Yunus, who was a Nobel Peace Prize winner. But Mubashar Hassan had a different view.
2 years ago, the things we're seeing now was not possible. To think that holding Prime Minister accountable in some way, seeing there is no systematic extrajudicial killing, enforced disappearances, there are challenges, obviously.
I think this is, him trying to talk about this as not being a systematic effort, is trying to differentiate the interim government from what we know is and is documented for the system of oppression that was running in Bangladesh under Hasina rule, under the Awami League. So, of course, all those that support the new regime or support the toppling of Hasina want to try and distance or between themselves and those reports on extrajudicial killings that we're seeing in order to sort of defend the new interim government. But I think mostly what it tells us is how chaotic it is. And this is also something that is hindering a lot of time changes because people know what they don't want. But the messy start of something new, which often fails, is you can also, from your own experience in Afghanistan, say, how hard it is to initiate. I think this is where we're at right now. We have to admit that Bangladesh is still very volatile and very fragile in its condition. And Yunus, as a leader, as an interim leader, is very controversial. This is also something I discussed with our guest, and let's see what he says about that.
Mm-hmm.
Unless there is huge pressure, international pressure, other kinds of pressure, India has no particular reason to oblige Mr. Yunus from the purely Indian point of view. Yeah, I'm not getting into the good or bad of it, but purely from the Indian point of view, Yunus has not done anything. Mr. Yunus, who is heading the interim government, has not done anything which India will feel obliged to oblige him. Very simple as that.
I think this is an important point because Shani, I remember when I was at the Munich Security Conference and Sheikh Hasina was talking on stage. She was invited to hold a speech on stage. I met an employee for Muhammad Yunus. She was really optimistic, and she was basically, this is the guy. He will bring democracy to Bangladesh. But this guy, he's also not a really strategic partner for India. I mean, he came from the West. He was being installed. He was actually being asked by the students because they wanted a more neutral figure, somebody who has no blood on his hands and somebody who seems, but he's a professor. He was maybe dealing with all these things in theory, but can it really then be implemented?
Well,
That's the
I think
question.
there's the element of the savior from the outside that comes, and of course he is not affected. His name and reputation isn't tarnished by the atrocities that are happening inside. But of course, there's always the fear. But also specifically with Yunus's case, as an economist, what triggered everything, the last straw, was the quota system. Basically, the feeling of students were that they are devoided of fair opportunities in their own land. So the idea of bringing this renowned economist to sort of reshape, revamp, the Bangladeshi economy seemed to be actually making sense. I think for many people right then, but as you're saying, and we see again and again, there's such stark difference between lecturing and researching and about things and implementing them, especially when the system on the ground is so corrupt, so broken.
Yunus has basically banned the Awami League, and I don't think this is seen as a good thing in India, right?
No, but I have to say, Yunus, it seems like, had a very tough choice to make, because either way, there's a lot on the line. The India support of Hasina had made it also very complicated for Yunus, because I think there's no doubt for both India and Bangladesh that they need each other. And there was a lot of criticism in India in the way it conducted itself with Yunus, that it may have not been smart enough in trying to reach out to the new interim government, but in general, that it had all these years counted only on Hasina and was not actually trying to build other, alliances within Bangladesh. Let's see what Bomik says about that.
Well, for people who don't understand the dynamics of Bangladesh and Bangladesh-India relations, it's pretty easy to say India put all its eggs in one basket. I've heard this Western, thing that India, its diplomacy was not, it was very regime specific. It put all its eggs in one basket. What choice did India have? Having said that, the government of BJP, which was in power in 2001 when Bangladesh elections happened, tried very hard to develop close relations with the BNP government.
So this is really fascinating, because it looks like India tried to work with the BNP government, but they failed. So the Hasina was the only predictable partner for them.
Yeah, and an easy partner and a known partner, of course. But there's one thing also that he said when we spoke, and in a different part of the conversation, when he talks about it's not about values, it's about interest. It's about shared interest.
There are no permanent friends in international politics, only permanent interests. And we have to take it issue by issue.
And in that aspect, the interest that India has in Bangladesh and vice versa, these stand regardless who the government is. And this is also where we stand now, that the dependency that they have on each other, the importance that they have as partners and as neighbors of each other is very big, especially when we try to zoom out and we try to look at the foreign influence coming in, definitely the Chinese getting closer with Pakistan and everything that is happening there. So there is no doubt that if it's about interest, then it should have been for India, it should have been easier for India to try and forge a bit more nuanced, maybe, policy. I mean, there's no doubt that both sides would need to work hard to make it happen again. And there's no doubt that the most important thing for moving forward is the election.
And that is one thing both of our interview partners actually agreed on.
Yeah.
That elections are the way forward, and the focus should be on the elections, real elections.
And let's notice that there's semantics when we talk about free and fair elections. And it's also, I think everybody understands elections are important, but I think the fight or the disagreement on how it should be done and what's the best way to go about it, this is where, the devil is in the details. Let's try to get the details on these two.
Well, India will definitely, try to deal with the government of Bangladesh, whoever is in government. But India has insisted that we are preaching strongly for a free, fair, and inclusive election in Bangladesh. Now, how can you leave out the Awami League? Is that democracy? Is that what Mr. Yunus wants? So let the people of Bangladesh decide. Mr. Yunus is not an elected leader.
Bangladesh needs an elections. Bangladesh needs a government that is representative of the people's will. That's number one. That will empower people immensely. Even just this idea and sense that I could elect who my representative has a lot of positive psychological impact on a society. Number two is they need to create a lot of jobs. It was one of the major source of resentment in Bangladesh.
I think this is the central question. For Bangladeshis, it's more about being seen, about dignity, about representation. So I think this is what they really hope for the next election. But for India, it's more about stability and whether or not the Awami League will be included in this process, in this election process.
Yeah, I understand that, and I understand why for many Bangladeshi, after all these years, they feel that they need to sort of, move on from Awami League. Is such an important thing. But I think there is a point there that
Yes.
our guest is making, in the sense that let the people judge what the Awami League represents, the part of history and legacy it has in Bangladesh. That cannot be taken away so easily. And maybe Hasina is out, but then it doesn't mean that Awami League as a force, as a political force, needs to be out completely. And of course, it's clear that India has an interest in maintaining, the Awami League in the picture. But at the same time, I think it's also important for the Bangladeshi people.
And I think Mubashar Hassan, he suggested a very good compromise, in my view. He basically said that there should be individuals who were in the Awami League, who have no blood on their hands, who have no, who were not on trial. Those are the ones who should be included in the process, according to him. Because I agree with you. I also think that it's never good to suppress and exclude parties, movements. If one thing history has shown us is that it never has a good outcome if you do that. But there's one more piece of this puzzle. And I think Subir was very direct about it. He said Bangladesh's crisis isn't happening in a regional vacuum. China is moving fast, as you've also pointed out, Shani, and India's room to maneuver is shrinking.
Let's first see maybe what he told me about
Let's
that.
see what he says.
I think our relation with China has really improved, especially on the border. And Modi has met Xi Jinping. So a lot is going on in the positive direction vis-a-vis China. US, well, we have good relations with the US, but the Trump factor is annoying, really, because somebody you took as a friend is suddenly comes here and says, you can't buy oil from Russia. That's like trying to impose yourself. And how can a self-respecting nation like India accept all this nonsense?
I found it very interesting that you talked to him. You talked to many people in India, and they might be willing to admit one failure, at a time. When it comes to Pakistan, to Afghanistan, to China, we have been discussing many of these in the last,
Yes.
regularly on our episodes. But when you try to zoom out and try to look at the general strategy that India has been leading and how it's been, affecting India's stature and influence in the region, and has it really substantially been so weakened after all these tiny little blows? In India, there's a very big pushback against this idea. They believe that, like we're hearing now about China, that there is still hope and many things that that are good are happening. And you also have to give it to India that they are working under a very hostile American administration. It seems like that Modi, Trump, the breakup between them, the breaking of the alliance between those two countries, of course, it puts India in a very fragile situation. And I'm not sure how many good options it even has on the table when it comes to responding, considering how volatile and unpredictable Trump and his administrations are.
And we would like to know your thoughts. What do you think? Has the United States under Trump pushed India too far? And can Prime Minister Modi revive that relationship, or is a reset unavoidable? Just put your thoughts in the comments.
And this is, I think, bringing us to an end, almost. I want to
Almost.
finish with a positive note. Mubashar Hassan was actually a very interesting voice, in the sense that despite having gone through a lot and experiencing firsthand oppression, he still remains analytic and also very hopeful.
He was still very hopeful. He was basically saying that he has a lot of hope for the country and he's very optimistic. So let's hear from him.
I'm quite excited about elections, because the last time I've seen election taking place in Bangladesh is back, I think, in 2008, when Awami League came. But election used to be a sense of national festival across the country. So there are a lot of hopes. Most hopeful about the young generation who are brave and who think less and take action. So I think they will hold the next government accountable. So I'm quite hopeful.
Wow, this is a very powerful message. This is a very empowering and positive, and he even finds the small things to hold on to. And we have to say that it's more than just small. There are elections planned for February in Bangladesh, controversy and everything. It is coming. We'll have to see and monitor what is the result, and of course, what is the response from the Awami League supporters for these elections. But I want to stay optimistic, just like our guest is.
And much of the hope actually comes from the youth, the people who were vital when it came to this development, and the people who were actually the ones who brought down Hasina's government.
So I think we'll finish with that. So thank you for joining us, and a big thank you for our great guests, Dr. Mubashir Hassan and Subia Bomek.
And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments, and we will see you next time.
See you then.
Thank you for watching Global Eyes.
Global Eyes, a new take on security policy by DW.